Terrible news, dramatic few hours in Afghanistan. Are we going to be able to evacuate the remaining nationals and also those Afghans who've been assisting Australian Defence Forces?
Well, since April, 430 locally engaged employees, Afghans and their families, we've been able to already bring to Australia and resettle, anticipating this deteriorating situation. As you know, we closed our embassy in May and moved the Australian personnel at that time. We're continuing with our operations in conjunction with our partners in what is a very dangerous part of the world and a deteriorating situation. We've been working through that over recent days. This morning, the Foreign Minister will be speaking to Secretary Blinken in the United States. I had a discussion with the Prime Minister Ardern last night, and our National Security Cabinet meeting will convene again early in a little while from now and review the various operations. But I obviously can't go into detail on that for the safety of those who are involved.
Can you tell us how many?
No, I don't think as I just said, I'm not going to go into those operations. It's for the protection of those we're engaged in seeking to provide for their safety.
How can you tell the families of the 41 soldiers this morning? We've been speaking to an ex-SAS soldier who said he hoped that there was a man in a suit or a woman turning up at homes around Australia to explain what all this was about. How do you tell them that it was worth it?
Freedom's always worth it, fighting for it, whatever the outcome. But importantly, the reason we went there was to track down Osama bin Laden and to ensure that we denied Al-Qaeda a base of operations out of Afghanistan. And there has been so much blood and treasure lost in this very difficult campaign over 20 years. And our thanks are always to Australians who serve. They don't get to decide the mission. They don't get to decide the place. Those decisions are taken at another level, and they go and serve, and they faithfully serve, and they do it with great courage and great commitment to their country and the values that Australia represents, which is freedom.
Were there deaths in vain, though, when you see already people discussing whether this is now going to leave open Afghanistan becoming a breeding ground for terrorism again?
No Australian who's ever fallen in our uniform has ever died in vain. Ever.
Are you concerned that Afghanistan could become a breeding ground for terrorism again?
We will continue to work with all of our partners to protect Australia from terrorism, and we've got a very good track record on that front, but we are never complacent about it, and we will continue to put our greatest efforts into keeping Australians safe.
How do you feel about the women and children and girls in particular whose lives are now going to be controlled once again by a brutal Taliban regime?
Devastated. Absolutely devastated about it. It's a terrible situation.
Has this been a catastrophe? Has it been, it just seems that this is not how the Allies and the US anticipated things would go, that you have been basically caught out here.
It's a very challenging situation in Afghanistan, always has. You look at the history, that is the story of Afghanistan. It is a tragic place. It is a tragic country that has borne such terrible hardships and catastrophes over a very long period of time. And sadly, that story continues.
Prime Minister, can I move on to the COVID situation? The New South Wales Premier has said it's going to be near impossible to eradicate cases in New South Wales. Does that mean the end for zero COVID in Australia?
Well, it has never been the job to get to zero COVID. Seeking to minimise and community cases transmitted in the community, of course, has been a goal. But the idea you can have zero COVID in any country has never been Australia's plan. We've been embarked on a suppression strategy. And right now we're in phase A of that national plan of hope. That's the plan of hope that Australians are looking to achieve those 70% targets. We've got 1 in 4 Australians fully vaccinated this week. 1 in 2 Australians will hit that mark who have had their first dose. We've got the 1 million doses of hope coming, have already arrived, the first shipment from Poland, and that's going straight into those most important areas in southwestern in Sydney for 20 to 39-year-olds to support the lockdown that is in place in New South Wales. But those doses will also go right across the country, because I'm not complacent about any other part of the country. As you say, Victoria extending lockdowns. We are in here and one in the ACT. The Delta strain is incredibly difficult. It's causing a further wave of COVID all around the world. Australia is no different, and we're battling it just like everybody else.
You might say that zero COVID hasn't been the policy, but quite frankly, that's not how the states have approached it when they've shut down cities and millions of people over one or two cases. And we've now got Mark McGowan in WA saying that even if you get to 70 or 80% vaccination, that he's still going to hold the right to shut the border and keep people out. That doesn't sound like what was agreed at National Cabinet.
Well, that, as you've characterised it, that isn't what was agreed at National Cabinet. What happens in Phase B when you hit 70%, which is based on the best medical and economic advice available to all leaders in Australia, the Doherty Institute, working together with all the state and Commonwealth treasuries, made it very clear that once you hit those levels, it is neither in our health or economic interests to be going down that path.
Well, what do you do with a Premier who says that he's going to do it?
We've all made commitments to the people.
Well,
through this plan of hope. That is our pathway back. So I'll let you finish.
Well, it's just
sorry, was there another question?
The WA Premier said this just yesterday morning, Prime Minister.
No, I understand what was said, and my point is this, is that on 3 occasions we agreed this plan. On the first occasion, that in Phase B of that plan, we had moved from managing cases to managing serious illness and hospitalisation. That's when you hit 70%. That's when people who are vaccinated would be exempted from various restrictions. That's when you start allowing more students and others coming into the country to support our economy. And in that plan, that's when you're managing hospitalisations. And you start saying goodbye to lockdowns in Phase B. And in Phase D, you can really say goodbye to them. But right now, we're in the first phase, and that's suppress and vaccinate. And the vaccination program now is hitting rates of vaccination 1.5 million a week. 1.5 million a week. That's what gets the job done. And I want to continue to encourage Australians to go and get vaccinated. And that plan of hope is an important motivator, I think, for Australians. And that's why it's important that all of us continue to encourage Australians. It's a deal we've got with the Australian people, that they get to these marks. Then they can expect things to move forward. But that's the deal that all premiers and chief ministers have signed up to, and making that commitment to their own citizens, and we've got to hold to that.
Prime Minister, if we've still got hundreds of cases a day in New South Wales, but we get to that 70%, 80% mark, do we open up?
Well, what is clear from the advice we've received from Doherty is once you're achieving those levels of vaccination, then the many other measures that you've got available to you, that's when your testing and tracing, isolating and quarantining is far more effective, because you've been able to reduce the transmission capability that exists in the community. See, vaccination changes that calculus very significantly. When you've got vaccination rates less than that, which we've seen in other countries that have tried to open up too early, go to their freedom days, things like this, and then they've had to change it. The plan that we've set out has been carefully worked out based on that advice to ensure that when you move, you can move. Now, we are looking carefully at what the impact of a higher number of cases are when you get to that phase. And that's why I've been so strong on the point, particularly in New South Wales, that we need to make sure this lockdown works. Now, the additional doses of hope that we've got out of Europe, and I want to thank Prime Minister Morawiecki for his great support of Australia in answering our call. He was very aware, as I discussed with him, the situation, particularly in Sydney, and this is really going to help the situation in Sydney. But on its own, it has to be backed in by the strong lockdown working in Sydney, and that's why I appeal to all my fellow Sydney-siders, please stay at home. We do this together and we get through it together, and the stronger we go into Phase B with fewer cases, the stronger the country will be.
Prime Minister, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your time.